Batteries to power. Turbines to speed.
Ready to move out.
Before we start, I'd like to say something. There's no reason why you shouldn't have complete confidence in your chances to come out of this thing alive in one piece.
From coast to coast, from border to border, from one end to the other, and all points in between. The Classic Guitar Rock Podcast is on.
Yes! That's awesome!
We crank up and break down the great guitar-driven rock of the 70s and 80s, and you are invited to come along.
We got a full tank of gas, half a pack of cigarettes, it's dark, and we're wearing sunglasses. Hit it.
And now your hosts, Jeremy and Jeff.
1/2 teaspoon for fast, effective relief.
It's time for the Classic Guitar Rock Podcast.
Okay, welcome to the Classic Guitar Rock Podcast, and I think we're up to episode 15. Is this 15?
15. This is 15.
Episode 15. Jeremy and Jeff. Jeff, I have a new name for you. It's Boulder Jeff. Boulder Jeff.
Boulder Jeff.
Yeah, kind of like Boulder Dash, you know. It's Boulder Jeff. Okay, so Jeremy and Boulder Jeff, and we are excited about this episode. There are albums. We're going to talk about Led Zeppelin II. There are albums, I would say Led Zeppelin II, I would say Dark Side of the Moon. There are these huge albums that are almost like holy ground to a lot of people, right? So when you have an album like this, at least I do, I feel a sense of responsibility to to treat it accordingly. But at the same time, you know, we got to be honest. If there's things we don't like about these, we need to talk about those. But I'm super excited about the album today.
I hadn't really, dove in and listened to these tracks in a long time. Because, we'll get into it. But like I said, I think you take it for granted.
Totally.
So good. So groundbreaking at the time.
And that
there were other things groundbreaking, but this was one of them.
Groundbreaking in that, I kind of said this earlier off mic. By the time we were listening to this music, I'm assuming we were at least, in our early teens, probably. So by the time we were listening to this music, it had already been around for 10 or 12 years, right? And what we forget is contextually, this was brand new in 1969. And I like to put myself in the place of a listener in 1969 when they hear this for the first time. And I think it really is groundbreaking. And they were doing things that hadn't been done before. And I see sometimes people think that Led Zeppelin is overrated or these sorts of, I don't think they are. I don't think they are overrated.
I don't think so.
And that doesn't mean there aren't some tracks that aren't necessarily your favorite. And I was even listening this morning as I'm running errands. I was listening to Celebration Day, the live concert back from, when was it, 2012 or whatever, 2008, for Ahmet Ertegun, when they got back together and did the one concert. And a couple things jumped out. Obviously, they'd lowered the songs. They'd changed keys on all the songs so Robert could sing them better. Because let's face it, when you're 65 or 70, you don't have the same voice you had when you were 25. But even with them lowering, even with Robert Plant scaling it back a little bit, it still sounds really good. And he is a consummate lead singer. I think he, more than anyone, well, Bonham too, became kind of the archetype for heavy metal. People talk about Led Zeppelin being the beginning of heavy metal. And I see why they say that, but I don't really hear that in Jimmy's guitar as much as I hear it in Robert Plant's vocals and Bonham's drumming. I think those are the two elements more than anything that were kind of co-opted for heavy metal. But we'll get into that. We'll get into that.
Yeah, I don't. Someone said heavy metal band. I'm not immediately thinking Zeppelin.
Me neither. Yeah.
Not that doesn't mean they're not heavy at times.
But there are definitely elements. What classic metal singer has not tried to sound like Robert Plant at some point, right? and there have been several clone bands. Greta Van Fleet, currently, back in the 80s, Kingdom Come.
Oh yeah.
White Snake. People accuse Coverdale of just ripping off Plant, whether you agree with that observation or not. But let's wait a minute, because Jeff, when you came on, you were very excited about a new piece of equipment you acquired. So this is basically a free plug we're going to give someone here. So give us the story on this piece of equipment you acquired.
And it was free, which is amazing.
Nice.
People
are getting excited. Jeff got free equipment. I can't wait.
Yeah, I love those guys that get guitars and Universal Audio aux boxes sent to them for free to try them out and plug them.
You're saying that's not what you got? It's not a guitar. Okay.
Why I'm kind of excited is because I'm looking actually at my desk right here. I've got probably 5 or 6 different kinds of guitar picks.
Okay.
Because I change and I switch guitars, and different picks actually go better with, that guitar or that guitar. I bought the JHS Bonsai pedal.
Okay.
JHS, great company. Josh making pedals. The Bonsai is a tube screamer. There's 9 different kinds of tube screamer pedals in this thing.
Right.
In the box is this free pick. I said, oh, whatever. I buy a lot of pedals and they come with picks.
Right.
But this one, I don't know. I thought it looks kind of cool. And it's got JHS on it from a company called Gravity.
And so those of you watching on YouTube can see the actual video.
Yeah.
It's a cool looking pick.
It's a cool looking pick. It's kind of translucent. It's thick. I think it's a 1.5 millimeter. But I went to their website and they make thicker ones.
Wow.
Like people doing what is it called? Gent?
Yeah.
Genting?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And it's big for me as well. And I just thought I'm going to just pick it up and start strumming. And immediately, I don't know, it just fits great. It doesn't slip. And it's got this unpolished edge. You can buy the polished edge as well. I found out. But this one's unpolished. So it's like a little rough. Mm-hmm. But when you dig into the string, you could just dig in. It kind of grips. The articulation is like, boom, right there. So I was impressed. I went to their website and I bought some.
He's a fan.
I'm a fan.
We are not endorsers. We are not paid spokespeople.
No.
This is a legit testimonial from an actual user.
Yeah. And then you think, oh, picks, whatever.
Yeah.
They don't make a difference. Maybe make a little difference. But this one, I thought it did. So I bought some, and I can't tell exactly what this was made out of. Mm-hmm. I think it's acrylic, because the other ones on the website are acrylic. But on their site, it just mentions, oh, this is Josh's company, and this is a great pick, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't tell you what's actually, but I think it's acrylic. Anyway, awesome. Check it out.
And
gravitypicks.com.
Gravitypicks.com. And I was
not
just
sponsored, but
yeah, they're not a sponsor yet. Maybe, I don't know, Jeff. What do you think? We'll give them a call.
I'd love to try out all the picks and then talk about them.
JHS pedals, by the way. I don't own a JHS pedal, but I'm a huge fan of his YouTube channel. And Josh has some excellent videos. If you're a guitar nerd like Jeff and I, you can waste hours watching his videos, histories of different guitar pedals and amplifiers. And what I like is he makes pedals and he's selling pedals, but he talks about other companies' pedals, and it's a really cool channel. So if you haven't checked out the JHS pedals page on YouTube, you definitely want to do that. So
I like when he demos pedals, his or other people's. Often him and his band will play, and they're pretty good. They write some fun stuff.
I just realized, Jeff, on the not last episode, the one before last, I downloaded a YouTube audio track from JHS pedals. So they've uploaded some of their little tunes to YouTube. So YouTube producers can use, copyright free music. He's got a couple up there. And one of the bumpers I used week before last was from JHS. I just remembered that. Speaking of bumpers, this is a tease for toward the end of the show. Toward the end of the show, we're going to hear a bumper that Jeff produced. So I'm looking forward to that.
Whoop, whoop.
Jeff is going to be Boulder Jeff will be our new bumper producer. It's really cool. So I'm looking forward to that. We'll let you know when we play it. But that's really cool. One other thing before we come back and talk about Led Zeppelin II, we have a new sponsor, and I made the invitation on the last episode that if you are interested in sponsoring, the great thing about sponsoring a webcast, by the way, let me put on my marketing nerd hat. The cool things about podcasts are they are very niche oriented. Like, for instance, as you can imagine, a podcast like this, our core demographic are males like 45 to 60 years old. Now, if you don't fall into that demo, that's great. We love to have you here, but the majority of our listeners fall into that category. So if you are an advertiser and a marketer and are trying to reach 45 to 60-year-old males, a podcast like this is a perfect venue to do that. And in terms of advertising, there's two things. There's reach and there's frequency, right? Reach is the total number of people, or cum is sometimes what they call it, that you reach. And frequency, how often can they hear your message? Well, the nice thing about a podcast is even if the reach isn't that great yet, the frequency is there. And podcasts are what you call evergreen, right? So an episode that we post tonight, right? After we record this and we post this episode tonight or tomorrow, it will be here forever. So if a commercial is put into an episode, that commercial will continue to be heard forever, right? And if you buy in, if you invest in advertising on a podcast at the beginning, like we are, imagine 5 years from now, Jeff, when we've knocked Joe Rogan out of the top spot.
Coming for you, Joe.
These commercials that you paid dirt, that you paid hardly anything for, are still being listened to by millions of people. So it's actually a really good investment to advertise on a podcast for several reasons. But anyways,
the uranium of the web.
The uranium of the web.
Or whatever.
Exactly. So I bring that all up because, number one, it's another invitation. If you'd like to advertise with us, email us, classicguitarrock@mail.com. We can get you all the information. But I am pleased to announce we have a sponsor. We have a sponsor for our show.
Hey.
So we want to welcome as our first official sponsor, Braun and Jarvis Family Dentistry, right here in my hometown of Spokane, Washington. So we'll hear a commercial from them. And then when we come back, Jeff, we're going to jump into this conversation about Led Zeppelin II.
Attention. If you live in Spokane, Washington and have teeth, this message is for you. Braun and Jarvis Family Dentistry knows teeth. Incisors, bicuspids, canines, molars. No tooth is too big or too small.
I was delighted and impressed. So impressed, I bought the company.
With Braun and Jarvis, you'll have the sweetest grill in the inland Northwest. And let's be honest, nobody wants a funky grill. Braun and Jarvis Family Dentistry. 509-464-2391. That's 509-464-2391. Braun and Jarvis Family Dentistry. Quality dentistry that doesn't suck.
All right.
Awesome.
So there's our official sponsor.
I want to go.
I want to go too, man. So yeah, we want to thank Braun and Jarvis Family Dentistry in Spokane, Washington, for being our first sponsor. And a little backstory there. So Brad Jarvis, Dr. Jarvis, he's a friend of mine. He's a drummer. So we play in a band together.
Oh,
and he reached out. I was joking, actually. I was saying, hey, you should be a sponsor. Joking, completely joking. And he said, no, I'd be a sponsor. And I said, well, really, Brad, our listeners aren't really so much here in Spokane. They're kind of spread out all over. So it probably wouldn't make a whole lot of sense. He said, no, I want to do it. I want to do it. And he wanted a monster truck style commercial. So that's what he got.
That was your voice, obviously, right?
Oh, yeah, that was me.
And you did the like a radio, like you filtered your voice, right?
Oh yeah. It's
kind of toward the end.
And there's some special sauce there. But that's the fun, doing a tractor pull. And we don't have to do tractor pull commercials, Jeff. If someone wanted to be a sponsor and didn't want a tractor pull or monster truck style commercial, they don't have to have one.
Although they might now.
They might now. It's fun. It gets your attention, right? So anyways, Hey, speaking of Spokane, that's where I live. There's a connection between Spokane and Led Zeppelin. And I wasn't aware of this till I did some homework. The very first live recording of Led Zeppelin happened December 30th, 1968 at Gonzaga University right here in Spokane, Washington.
Is that right?
The very first live recording of Led Zeppelin happened here in my hometown, which is kind of cool. And there's you can Google various names. There's sometimes it's called the Gonzaga bootleg. You know, if you Google Led Zeppelin Gonzaga bootleg, you can find it. I've heard it. It's a bootleg, so it's not the best quality, but it sounds, you can tell the band was good back then. I think this was their fourth live show in the US, I think, on their first US tour. But this was the first live recording that was made of Led Zeppelin. So, and that was
in the US or ever.
As far as my understanding is, this is the first live recording of Led Zeppelin.
Cool. I'm going to check it out.
Kind of cool. Yeah. So that happened right here, just down the road. I actually worked at Gonzaga about 15 years ago. So that's just a cool little piece of local history.
What is Gonzaga again?
Gonzaga is a Jesuit university here in Spokane. And if you're a basketball fan, Gonzaga is currently the number 1 ranked NCAA basketball team. And what's amazing about that is Gonzaga has about 5,500 students, and they compete against the Dukes and the North Carolinas and the Kansas. They made it to the finals like 3 years ago. They didn't win, but they were second in the U.S. They're typically ranked, every year in the top 25. They just have a really good basketball program, and they're a tiny little school, which is amazing. And apparently the first place where Led Zeppelin was ever recorded live way back in 1968. So kind of cool.
Awesome.
So it's wonderful. Led Zeppelin II. Let's talk about Led Zeppelin. I think they're icons. They're one of those bands that I think for the most part, everyone understands the importance of the band. They understand how influential the band has been. So it really can't be understated. Led Zeppelin II came out. Do you have the date in front of you? I think it was October 22nd of 1969.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm seeing.
And it was January of 69. Zeppelin I came out, right? Whatever they called it.
I think you're right.
So in the same year.
And that's the thing is
January of 69.
By 71, okay, Led Zeppelin IV came out. So they're putting albums out like 2 a year, which was kind of the norm back then. I know Led Zeppelin I think it took recording and mixing was 9 days total. Okay. Now, the amazing thing about Led Zeppelin II, which a lot of folks consider this, when you make lists of Led Zeppelin's best albums, this one is often at the top. Physical Graffiti is often at the top. Led Zeppelin IV is, it's one of those 3 albums usually. But what's amazing about this album is this was recorded during their tour. Yeah. And so if you look at the notes, they use like 6 different studios. They would be in LA. Okay, let's go in for 4 hours and record a song. Ardent Studios. We talked about Ardent Studios last week with ZZ Top. They recorded some of it in Ardent Studios.
And Plant wasn't a fan of that.
No, he did not like that. And
I wouldn't have liked that either.
Oh yeah, that would be crazy. And this is Eddie Kramer. This is when they started working with Eddie Kramer. So Eddie Kramer was their engineer, and producer's Jimmy Page. So Jimmy Page is the producer. But yeah, it's very fascinating that this was recorded the way it was, and yet it's an awesome album. Jeff, this was Jeff's recommendation. And like Jeff, I've heard the album. I own the album. I have it on vinyl here. In fact, I meant to have it here in front of us. I'll go grab it here in a sec. But it's been a long time since I've listened to it front to back and really paid attention to it. I've been listening to it in my car a lot where I can play it really loud. Mm-hmm. There's not a bad track on it. I am impressed by every single person. You can listen and go, man, Bonham is an animal on this. Jimmy Page is awesome on this. John Paul Jones Okay. He's kind of the guy that gets the least press in Zeppelin, but he's like their utility man. I mean, he does, first of all, his bass playing on a couple tracks on this album are just
off the charts.
Oh, it's ridiculous. Yeah. Just crazy. And then, you know, he's playing keyboards. He's an arranger. Before he was in Led Zeppelin, he was arranging some week, 40 or 50 sessions a week. He's arranging. Page and Jones were session musicians. Mm-hmm. And, you know, in the 80s, it was Steve Lukather, right? Well, in the 60s in England, it was Page and John Bonham, or Page and John Paul Jones that played on so much stuff. I mean, Herman's Hermits and Petula Clark and Shirley Bassey. Page and Jones both played on Goldfinger. I did not know that. But I mean, these guys were playing on all kinds of just pop schlocky stuff. They were playing with The Who. They were playing with the Rolling Stones. Donovan, Sunshine Superman. And you made the point earlier that that's basically Led Zeppelin without Robert Plant. And yes, music wise, it totally sounds like Led Zeppelin, doesn't it? Yeah, it really does.
When you go back and listen to it, it's like totally. you recognize it, you know?
But these guys Page and Jones were very established in the studio scene. And then Plant and Bonham were in Band of Joy in a different band. And the early history of the band was Page was trying to put together a band with John Entwistle and Keith Moon, right, who were both in The Who. And he was looking at a couple different singers. One was a guy named Terry Reid, and another was Steve Marriott, which we talked about a few weeks ago. And we talked about how Steve Marriott was such an influence to Robert Plant. Well, the story goes that when they were talking about the lineup, I think they credit it to Keith Moon, who said that, oh, this will go over like a lead balloon. You know, when they're talking about this lineup of all these people, meaning that here we got all these people with egos, you know, this is going to go over like a lead.
I heard that too.
Yeah. And that kind of stuck. And for a while they talked about lead balloon. And I think it was Peter Grant who suggested don't spell it lead, L-E-A-D, because people might think it's lead balloon, you know, if they weren't familiar with that. So they spelled it L-E-D. And for a while, it was lead balloon. But then someone changed it to Zeppelin, which sounds way better, right? So then it was Led Zeppelin. And of course, you know, the rest is kind of history. It never happened with Entwistle. It never happened with Keith Moon, though Keith Moon and Jimmy Page, and I think John Paul Jones played on Beck's Bolero with Jeff Beck, which go listen to Beck's Bolero. That's a really cool song. And that's Jimmy Page. That's John Paul Jones. That's Keith Moon. And of course, Jeff Beck, one of the early heavy guitar instrumentals, right? But it's really cool. Now, when Led Zeppelin first started performing, okay, remember Page had been in the Yardbirds. The Yardbirds were kind of breaking up, but they had some dates in the Netherlands that they had to fulfill. And so the Yardbirds said, hey, if you want to tour with your new band to take care of these dates in Holland and wherever it was, you can do that. And so they started as the New Yardbirds and they toured as the New Yardbirds. But then at some point, Chris Draja, who was in the Yardbirds, who I guess owned the name, he said, well, no, you can't keep the New Yardbirds. We were going to let you do that one tour as the New Yardbirds, but you can't keep. And so that's when they started using the Led Zeppelin moniker.
Cooler name,
much cooler name. And it kind of, they would have been having, the Yardbirds were a great band, don't get me wrong, but I think it would have been a mistake to call themselves the New Yardbirds. They needed a new identity, right? And so they got that. The first album came out, and we're not really talking about the first album, but you know, that was a pretty successful album. It kind of put them on the map, but in my mind, this album's a lot better.
I think so. I mean, of course it's subjective, but certainly the production of it is really amazing and interesting for the time. And, you know, I always like to play music that I really respect, production wise, on my phone, then the car, then back to my studio where I have, nice monitors. And like this 1969, you play it on this little dinky device. It sounds fantastic. Yeah. Even John Paul, even the bass being distorted and so heavy, it just comes through. It's quite amazing.
We've been kind of going track by track as we go through these albums, but I told Jeff I want to do things a little different. I want to kind of talk about kind of our highs, rank the album or the songs on the album kind of in order of our favorite. And as we do that, I think we'll pull out some interesting things about each song. But as I mentioned, there's not a weak song on it. I think all the songs are solid. Some I like more than others. And having said that, as you listen to this album, you kind of understand the reaction that like the punk movement had toward a lot of these rock bands, these classic rock bands. Punk in the mid 70s, when that came out, it was kind of reaction to these overproduced, indulgent rock albums. And so for instance, I'll give you two examples on this album that I would say, yeah, this is overindulgent, right? We've got that breakdown in the middle of Whole Lotta Love for like 3 minutes. It's just bongos and it's weird stereo panning stuff. And it's, all that part. Okay.
A theremin.
Exactly. That's a little indulgent, right? And then we've got a drum solo on a studio album. I was trying to think of other studio albums with drum solos. Are there others? There's got to be some others, but I can't think of any.
Certainly not as iconic as this.
No. And it's like,
with a name, was a Willie Dixon song, right?
Moby Dick?
Wasn't it?
I don't know. It could be. I don't know. I think Willie Dixon wrote every other song.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's bring it on. That's bring it on home.
Let's bring it on home. Yeah, and we'll get into that whole thing too, because that's one of the parts of Zeppelin's past is they had a habit of
stealing.
Well, I didn't want to say stealing, but yeah, basically, they would play these songs and not necessarily give credit. And so one of the things we find out is they did pay a settlement to Willie Dixon sometime after this. And I'm not trying to defend that, but in their defense, as I say, I'm not trying to defend it. I think in my mind, this is how I envision it going down, right? Is they had a cool jam, right? They had because musically, these are not much in common with the Willie Dixon song, right?
Right. That's what I was going to say.
So they would write as this just jam, and Plant says, well, I got to sing something, so he just, and you've got some songs. It's a verse from this Willie Dixon song combined with a verse from this Howlin' Wolf song or whatever. He was just putting stuff together and probably wasn't even thinking about it. Right.
I'm sure he was also trying to develop his voice
for sure.
So you've got to have some lyrics to expand and to do something and to just practice.
Exactly.
And his screams and howls, right? But when it hits an album, it's like it's not too hard to say, oh, these lyrics were inspired or came from or were written by. But they didn't do that because probably back then, like you mentioned many times, it wasn't common. And it didn't seem like a big thing, but obviously, it is.
And I don't think they set out to intentionally steal. I think that's the way they did it. It's a little more free and loose. And after the fact, they've gone back and they have made some restitution or remuneration to some of these blues artists. And Led Zeppelin definitely wasn't the only band doing that, but they're just kind of known as one of the more flagrant violators. But anyways,
I wanted to say this album, by the way, I learned it knocked the Abbey Road off the number one, which I thought was quite amazing. Twice, apparently, from the top spot.
Yes, and another thing that I saw, and this has happened throughout a couple times, when they'd have a huge album, for instance, Led Zeppelin IV, this was the case, and I believe Physical Graffiti and maybe even In Through the Outdoor. But when they'd release a new album, very often all of the other albums in their catalog would pop back up into like the top 10. right? And that happened several times. And here's the interesting thing. Zeppelin was not a singles band, right? So they were not getting played on top 40 radio, and yet they still racked up tremendous album sales. There were some singles released against the bands. The band didn't want singles released. They thought these albums are written with the thought that people will listen front to back. It's the whole package. We want you to hear the whole thing. And yet Whole Lotta Love was released as a single and did really well in the US. Another thing that was interesting about Led Zeppelin is they were more popular in the US than in England. And part of that had to do, and this was a common thing, the Beatles did it, Pink Floyd did it, Led Zeppelin did it, the Rolling Stones did it. The tax burden was so astronomical for musicians, for rich musicians in England, that they wouldn't tour there, because any money they made in England, they had to pay huge taxes on. And so that's why you'd see them moving to France, moving to the US or whatever, so they didn't have to pay so high taxes. And that didn't make some of these bands that popular at home because people would say, well, you guys are just,
I did not know that.
Yeah. That was a big deal. And so a lot of times they would move to record somewhere else. They wouldn't want to tour there because any money they made there, they had to pay really high taxes on. And I don't know if that's still the case, but that was the case definitely in the 70s. And so that's why so many of these bands, Black Sabbath, right? They basically moved their operation out of England because the taxes were so high. And that was a pretty common thing.
Do you want to go down the list?
Let's do it. I got to get my list up here so I see all the songs in front of me.
This was really challenging. In the middle, there's 9 songs on the album. And so 3 to 7, I was kind of flipping around my choices,
Right.
It was tough.
Okay. So let me hear in order.
Okay.
How you have it.
I've got Whole Lotta Love, number 1.
Okay.
As obvious, possibly, but I mentioned this off mic, go back listening to this with headphones last night. I was actually cranking it.
Yeah.
And it's awesome.
There is
like
so
it's the
much
way
fun.
to do it, Okay, yeah. Number 2, Ramble On. Number 3, Heartbreaker.
Okay.
Number 4, What Is and Should Never Be. Number 5, The Lemon Song. Number 6, Thank You. Number 7, Bring It On Home. Number 8, Living Loving Maid. Number 9, Moby Dick. Now, Moby Dick is an amazing bottom. Obviously, we all know. But as a song, that's why I have it on the bottom.
Right.
And Living Loving Maid is sort of, you could almost hear that it wasn't taken so serious or something. Right. And then, of course, you read about it, and it's supposed to be about a groupie, and no one really loved the song. And
right. And now, is that the one that Led Zeppelin never played live? Is that
yes?
They never played it live. Plant has played it live after the fact, solo stuff, but they never played that song live, which surprised me.
And yet, that's the one that Heartbreaker goes right into.
Exactly.
When you hear it on the radio and they're doing 2 for Tuesday, right? Like we mentioned last week.
Yeah. That's
the song, and I'm sure they hear that and they're like,
For sure. So Interesting. Let me give you my list here. It's actually more different than I thought it would be, to be honest. My favorite song on this album, and part of it is nostalgia. I had a mixtape that I stole from, I didn't steal, but a mixtape that my brother's friend made. And somehow we wound up with this on cassette. It was a high quality Maxell cassette that a friend of my brother had made. And this was the first time I'd heard Ramble On. And so I listened to that as part of this other mixtape that had songs by Heart and Aerosmith and all kinds of stuff. But Ramble On, I've always loved. And that's my favorite song on the album. And I think Led Zeppelin kind of gets pigeonholed into this heavy rock band, but and I've heard Plant even say this, and I think Page has even said it, is they thought of themselves more of a folk band than a heavy metal band. The point being that they just played Led Zeppelin III is a pretty you kind of got all the elements of Led Zeppelin in one song. You know, you got the guitar, the acoustic guitar, and the little, it sounds like he's just tapping on top of the table or something, the little, until the heavy part kicks in. But it's just a great song. The lyrics are kind of cheesy. You know, he talks about Gollum and the darkest depths of Mordor. And I mean, that's nerdy. And I was listening to Led Zeppelin IV last night, and like, is it the Battle of Evermore? One of those songs are talking about ring wraiths and all kinds of these allusions to Tolkien, and they were nerds, right?
Yeah.
And that's okay. But I just love that song. My second favorite is actually Thank You.
Wow.
Favorite. Yeah.
Did you have a girlfriend at the time?
No, I don't know. I just have always kind of liked that song.
It is a great song. Don't get me wrong.
And again, I like the acoustic guitar on that.
Organ.
There's the organ, and then there's the one chorus where it talks about the rain falling or the birds chirping or something that sounds totally 1968. It has that more than any other song on the album sounds like the 60s. You know, sounds like a Age of Aquarius song, right? But I love that song. But now what I did, and I kind of cheated, I have Heartbreaker and Livin' Lovin' Made as one song. So I counted those as one song because like you said, I can't separate them. That's my number 3. But I do have to say this. Heartbreaker, I love. That's one of the first songs I sat down as a 14-year-old, 15-year-old and tried to learn the bow, But where there's the breakdown and it's just Jimmy playing his guitar. Some of that is really sloppy and messy sounding.
Oh yeah. That was part of his thing. And really, I don't know if he intentionally didn't want to, but it just felt like he was just going for it, and he was just and bluesy, rocky, hard.
It just starts out good, and then it gets to that. There's a flourish in the middle that's just a sloppy, messy. And part of me is like, well, why didn't you fix that? But I think you're right. I mean, I think that's the way it happened, and he just left it in. But overall, I love the song. I love it going into Livin' Lovin' Made. And I think you're right. I think Livin' Lovin', I don't want to say it's a throwaway, but yeah, they definitely did not take it as serious, as some of the other songs.
Okay, you're on 4 now?
I have Whole Lot of Love for number 4.
I guess it's really 5.
Because I combined those together, so that kind of messed it up. But anyways, Whole Lot of Love, great song, obviously. Now in this song, the lead guitar stuff, it's that same kind of gritty, raunchy tone, but it just sounds like he's much more articulate in this song than in that little solo section in Heartbreaker. And there's cool things, right? There's the long drawn out thing in the middle, which I think on the single version, they condensed that way down.
Which I love. I know you said it's a little,
over
the top, and it is, but
I'm not saying I don't like it. I'm saying why I see the criticism of this stuff being indulgent, because I could see some people saying, why did you do that? And the answer is they did it because they could. Why did they put a drum solo on a studio album? Because they could. And that was this is interesting. That was part of their contract when they were signed, that they had complete artistic control.
Yes, I read that as well.
So when I say they did that because they could, they really could. And
I mean, do you want to talk about, are we going to dive into every song as we go, or should I wait?
Yeah, I kind of have been. The one thing I wanted to say about Whole Lot of Love, and I'm sure you'll have a more in-depth technical analysis than me, but this part where it breaks down, way down inside, woman, and you hear, it's not a reverse echo, because it's not a reverse echo, but you hear very quietly in the background, and I'm sure they came in after the fact and inserted the little, I can't call it an echo because it's coming before he sings each line, right?
Yeah, I think it was on a second separate track.
Yeah, and they just looped.
And they couldn't, somehow it went through the console and they couldn't get rid of it. So they just left it, but it was an accident. And it wasn't intentional. It sounds great.
And how many times have other bands copied that and tried to get that same feel? Yeah. That was, and I didn't know that, Jeff. I didn't know that was an accident. I think it's cool. I think it's cool. I love that part.
I love the the opening riff, that probably most people play incorrectly.
Right.
And then
I'm sure I played incorrectly.
there's this one little trick that he shows, I think he shows on that documentary.
Might get loud.
It might get loud.
Uh-huh.
So he's actually he's playing like an octave with the D note, and he's bending up the D on the A string just a little bit, and so it clashes with the open D.
Little
so it's bang out that part, and you can hear it if you go back and listen. It's not just a clean D.
And most guys just play it clean. Yeah, they'll just
and then there's that reverb that's I know you love pan far right.
Yeah.
And it's almost out of time. It doesn't even really work.
And in headphones, it's almost distracting until it finally comes in and kind of resolves itself. And I don't want you to think I'm anti-stereo. The thing that I'm an anti-stereo.
You're just a mono guy, dude.
I'm a mono guy. No, I love stereo. My beef was when drums would be panned hard to one side, and
right.
I didn't like that. But I love, and this is what Page, and here's the thing about Page. He's a genius. I would put him up there as a master, but not necessarily because of his guitar playing, if that makes sense. I mean, he wrote some of the best riffs ever. But to me, what makes him so brilliant is this song is a perfect example. Just where did he come up with the idea of doing that?
Yeah.
You know, like you said, this crazy reverb stuff, and you hear all kinds of different guitar tones, and some of them, if you were to isolate the guitar tone just on its own, it's not that great a sound, but it works perfectly for the song. You know, it's maybe complementing another guitar sound that's over here. You got something that's really tinny and thin sounding over here. Now, is this a Telecaster on this album? Was he playing the Telecaster, or is this a Les Paul? I think this is mostly Telecaster on here, but I don't know for sure.
I don't know.
I know the early videos you see of a lot of the early Led Zeppelin stuff. It's Telecasters that he's playing. And it kind of has that feel for some really tinny stuff. So what's going on in that middle section, Jeff? In A Whole Lot of Love. There's so much going on, and I know Eddie Kramer, and he says that he and Jimmy were just twisting knobs and doing all kinds of stuff.
Twisting every knob they could get their
and there's
fingers on.
Robert Plant's, it's panning back and forth, and you've got all these, I don't know, are there pick scrapes? To me, it sounds like
I thought it was a pick thing with the guitar, but it's a theremin, or at least some of it is a theremin.
What's that? Tell us what a theremin is.
It's an electronic instrument, and basically you control it with your hands.
Okay.
You go back and forth.
Oh, that's right.
With this
and you don't touch it. It's just
you don't touch it. Yeah.
Closer. Okay, that's right.
It has like antennas. It's got like metal antennas.
And that's probably that weird, great stuff. Okay.
Yeah, I've used one before a little bit.
Wow, interesting.
It's awesome. It's really cool. And then, of course, you add all that delay and all the panning, and
it's a festival in your headphones. Yeah. I mean,
and talk about daring, right?
Oh yeah.
They're like, well, we're gonna just do this.
We're gonna do that, and
why not? You
got him moaning and screaming. It's crazy, but it's a great song. So then I have What Is and What Will Never Be, or What Should Never Be. What's it called? What Is and What Should Never Be. Okay. Again, I was saying this earlier. Led Zeppelin is kind of like Pink Floyd in that oftentimes the names of their songs, like Thank You's perfect example. You know, I've heard that song for years, and as I was starting to listen again, I could not tell you, Thank You. What the heck song is that? I don't remember that song. Then when I play it, I go, oh yeah, it's that song. I never knew it was called Thank You. But anyways,
this song mostly written by Plant.
Yes,
What Is and What Should Never Be.
Yep, he did write that. So that's not plagiarized, right?
He's got a cool flanger on his voice.
It's got the cool flanger, and I love the bass. I mean, this bass is just, it's great. Yeah. The bass is awesome, and I love the changes, right? I love that, it kind of sounds like it's building up, and then it gets to a solo, and it's that jazzy. I just love that. It's awesome.
Yeah, it's very almost trippy kind of.
Exactly, and it works perfect.
And he writes like, you will be mine by taking our time. It's like such a cool line. Like how old was he, right? At the time?
Yeah.
20, 21?
20. He was
20?
young. Yeah, couldn't have been too old. Yeah, it's just great. I love that song. Number 6, and I like you, I have Moby Dick at number 6. Is that what yours was too?
Mine was 9.
Okay, so I have Moby Dick, and I have to tell you, this is funny. When I went back and listened to this, because again, I haven't listened to this album in probably 25 years. And when I went back and listened, I realized when I played in a band, gosh, this is probably 20 years ago, playing in a classic rock band, we had this little instrumental vamp that we wrote, that we just play for like 2 minutes as we came on the stage. And I just realized listening to that is, my gosh, we had stolen Moby Dick. We were playing, the riff was pretty much, there are a few notes that are a little different, but it was pretty much just the guitar part of Moby Dick. That whole little thing. And I said,
you're stealing.
Oh my gosh, we had been playing Moby Dick as our intro the whole time. But then it gets into the drum solo, and John Bonham, I think he's phenomenal, but a drum solo on an album is just kind of weird. And I kind of prefer, this sounds so bad to say it, I would prefer it if the drum solo wasn't in there. Of course, then it's only a minute and a half long, but I like the riff. I think it sounds great. The drumming's great. I guess the drum solo, I could handle a little shorter drum solo. But
brevity.
Brevity. That's right. But it's good. I do like it. And then my number 7, I have Bring It On Home. Bring It On Home. It's obvious, they did it in 2 sections, right? There's the part where he's playing the harp and singing through the harp, so you get that funny effect,
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Which is kind of cool, but I like it better once it kicks in. Then you got the other part where it's the riffage, the electric part, the whole band's in, and then it ends again with the little harp part.
We used to play that song in a band.
Did you really? I love that.
Mm-hmm.
I love it. And now that I have it at number 7, I don't agree with that. I think that should be before Moby Dick. So I'd probably switch those around. I put that before Moby Dick.
A Willie Dixon song originally performed by Sonny Boy Williamson II.
I want to go get my record, my physical copy of this record, because there's something I want to look up. And while I'm going to get that, let's take a short break.
Sounds good.
Exclusively on ESPN Plus, UFC 313, Saturday. Reigning light heavyweight champion Alex Pereira defends his title against number 1 contender Magomed Ankalaev, and an explosive lightweight bout between Justin Gaethje and Rafael Fiziev. UFC 313, Saturday at 10 p.m. Eastern. Buy it on ESPNplus.com/PPV.
Welcome back to the Classic Guitar Rock Podcast, and check out this bumper music produced by our own Boulder Jeff. Jeff, this sounds awesome.
You like it? I'm glad.
It's
Thank
awesome.
you. Cool. It was fun.
So I just wanted to grab the actual album because in the research, it had said that they had a settlement with Willie Dixon.
Mm-hmm.
But as I look at the actual album, there is no mention in the songwriting credits to Willie Dixon or anyone other than members of Led Zeppelin, right? So there's a few songs where all 4 members are credited. Most of them are Page and Plant. But yeah, there's no mention of Willie Dixon. There's no mention. So the Lemon Song, Bring It On Home. Are there any others that were borrowed from? We know those 2 songs were, but I just wanted to double check because maybe on later versions they would credit those. I don't know. I haven't seen a newer version of those, but on this version of the album that I have, there's no credit given to anyone else. Which brings me to my last point. The last song on my list is the Lemon Song. And this one sounds more traditional. I think is this a Howlin' Wolf or
this Howlin' Wolf?
Okay.
killing floor.
And and it sounds like the guitar style is even Howlin' Wolf style. Bum, 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 you know.
Yeah, that's when he borrows his Squeeze My Lemon from
Squeeze My Lemon.
Travel in Riverside Blues, Robert Johnson.
Yep, exactly. And so there's a little, but you know, even the blues guys did that. They'd borrow from other blues guys and put them in. So Led Zeppelin is definitely not the only band who's borrowed from other people, but they get cited for that. Number one, because they were so successful and they did do it a lot. So they do kind of get brought into that discussion a lot.
You know what I like about the Lemon song is that double time where it breaks down.
Yeah,
changes,
when it breaks into the
double time kind of thing, and then a solo,
and then comes right back,
and it goes right back into the groove. You know,
super tight.
I mean, we haven't really. It's just hard to. Bonham is Bonham. We all know, right? Maybe that's not even. It's pointless to say. He's just one of the greatest rock drummers ever.
We could do a whole show. Totally.
But he shines on this whole album.
Yeah.
Let's just say that. I'm trying to remember if there was one bit in one song that stands out.
Actually, that part in the Lemon song you're talking about is pretty cool, to where they just come right back. Now, here's in Moby Dick, and as I was listening, I was trying to listen to tell, okay, did they actually play this live and the band all came back in real time as he's finishing the solo, or did they actually finish the drum solo and then edit in the band together at the end? And I don't know the answer to that. But if they actually recorded that live and came back in, which I have a feeling they probably did, that's awesome. That's amazing. And
it seems they did that a lot with this album, as we mentioned.
Yeah, I think so. And again, I said it earlier, it's easy to look at Bonham 50 years later and say, yeah, that guy was really good. He was really good. But this is new, you know, hot off the presses in 1969. To me, it's mind blowing. The way he played, the production, you talked about the production, the way it sounds, it's a masterpiece of an album.
If you went into the studio with your rock band and you produced this or the sound, you know, like a similar production sound wise, you'd probably be really psyched.
Oh,
you'd be like, wow, the drums sound great. Guitars sound great. The bass, that distorted bass on a few of these, so good.
Really good.
And so like, you know, what else would you do? Like what, if you were going for that classic rock heavy, a little heavy.
Exactly.
Production. Like it's the Marshall with probably a Les Paul. I think actually now thinking about it, but I could be wrong.
It's definitely, you see why they are considered, if not the greatest band, one of the greatest bands. And I was too young to witness it, but they were huge in the 70s. I mean, they were huge. You know, we've heard the stories of their excess, tearing up hotel rooms, all of this thing, which what I've read is that did happen a few times, but they would play that to their advantage. They weren't as wild and crazy as they make it sound. But man, their shows, they were a huge live draw throughout the 70s. And when Bonham died in the 80s, there was speculation. They talked about Cozy Powell. They talked about Bev Bevan. I can't remember, but a few different names of drummers were thrown out that, hey, but that was not to be. You know, it wasn't long after his death that the band basically said, we're done. It would have been interesting to see what would have happened had he not died. I get the feeling that they probably wouldn't have gone on much longer anyways. I kind of think, I don't know, I could be wrong. It kind of seems like they had kind of run their course, I think, but it would have been interesting. And Jason Bonham on that Celebration Day, friend, that guy is really good. I mean, he
inherited the gene for sure.
Oh, totally. And I heard a story of Robert Plant talking that this would have had to have been probably the last tour. You know, they played Nebworth in like 79, maybe that last tour, maybe earlier. So this would have been In Through the Outdoor, and they're doing rehearsals so they're warming up for the tour, and he's up there singing, and they're doing their whole thing. And Robert Plant looks out, at the end of the auditorium, and Bonham's out there. And then he turns around and looks back, and Jason had been back there playing drums, for like 5 minutes. And
wow.
Plant had never even turned around, didn't even notice. And I think he was 14 or something at the time. And you can go on YouTube and see footage from the early 80s. So Jason is a teen, probably 18 something, 19, but there's footage of him playing with the guys, and he's solid, man. So obviously his dad was John Bonham, but he is a awesome drummer in his own right. I mean, he's really good.
Yeah, absolutely. I was looking online here. I don't want to speak incorrectly. It looks like Whole Lotta Love was recorded with a Telly, like you said, but then he switched over to a Les Paul, and it's hard to tell from this article if he used it on some of the songs on Led Zepp 2.
Interesting.
But I think it was because he was using a Supro, that kind of amp, and the Les Paul was too much for it. So he said the Telly was.
The Telly.
Yeah. But then,
the iconic image is always with a low slung Les Paul, when you think of Jimmy Page.
Yeah.
So, hey, this is a great album. I think we both agree that it's one that everyone should have in their collection. And I think Led Zeppelin deserves the reputation they have. I think they are one of the most influential bands, and they were a talented bands. And all four members, right? All four members are just the top of the top in classic rock.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of like I said, to take it for granted a little bit until you start analyzing it and really listening.
For sure.
You kind of remind yourself, wow, I'm unbelievable, right?
Yeah.
Like a bunch of bands. There's a handful of bands that get together and make magic that never would have happened.
For sure. Yeah, thank you so much, Jeff, and thank you for joining us for this episode of the Classic
My pleasure
podcast. Yeah, and email us, classicguitarrock@mail.com, if you're interested in being a sponsor, or if you have comments or a recommendation for a topic of a show or anything else. And we also want to thank Braun and Jarvis Family Dentistry right here in Spokane, Washington, for being our sponsor. And we'll see you guys next time on the Classic Guitar Rock podcast.
Go get your teeth cleaned, you filthy animals.
Thanks for listening to the Classic Guitar Rock podcast. Please like, subscribe, and share. You can email us at classicguitarrock@mail.com. We'll see you for the next episode of the Classic Guitar Rock podcast.